OECD defines tax evasion as illegal arrangement where liability to tax is hidden or ignored, such as the taxpayer pays less tax than he is legally obligated to pay by hiding income or information from the tax authorities. This shows that the issue of tax evasion has been persistent even on the global level among developed nations such as USA, Brazil, and Italy. Tax evasion is a well-established discipline. There had been many studies conducted on tax evasion and its relationship with the determinants from the theory of planned behavior, namely attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control that have significant influence toward tax evasion behavior. Tax is an important source of revenue for the government of Malaysia. In Malaysia specifically, the government relies on tax more than 50% of the total revenue. In 2020, the government collected 99.6 billion ringgit of income tax and a total of 112.8 billion ringgit was collected in 2019, which proved Malaysian government reliance on tax collection as source of revenue. The issue of tax evasion has been persistent since several years back, which proven by Lembaga Hasil Dalam Negeri LHDN annual reports, which stated there were 537,829 ringgit penalties being charged to people who evaded tax from 2015 to 2017. As compared to other countries in the Asia and Pacific regions, tax to GDP ratio in Malaysia can be considered low at 12.4% of GDP in 2018 and 2019. Novianti and Dewi in 2017 said that having a low tax ratio level indicates that the government collects a low amount of tax revenue.
Research question and also research objective. So the research objective of this study are firstly to identify the significant influence of attitude towards tax evasion among civil servants. Secondly, to identify the significant influence of subjective norms towards tax evasion among civil servants. Thirdly, to identify the significant influence of perceived behavioral control towards tax evasion among civil servants. So the research questions of this study is reflected from the research objectives. Okay, next is conceptual framework. So this conceptual framework indicates that tax evasion behavior, which is the dependent variable, is determined by these three independent variables as extracted from the theory of planned behavior by Acheson, which are attitude, subjective norms, and also perceived behavioral control. So these determinants will eventually have positive or negative effects on the tax evasion behavior.
The first IV is attitude, and the hypothesis is H1. Attitude toward tax evasion significantly influences the public servants in Malaysia in complying with the tax laws while performing their professional roles. The second IV is subjective norms, and the hypothesis is H2. Subjective norms significantly influence the public servants in Malaysia in complying with the tax laws while performing their professional roles. Last but not least, the third IV is perceived behavioral control, and the hypothesis is H3. Perceived behavioral control towards tax evasion significantly influence the public servant in Malaysia in complying with the tax laws while performing their professional roles. In this study, the researcher uses quantitative research since data will be collected through surveys. This research utilizes cross-sectional analysis since it consists of a series of observations on the correlation between the determinant of theory of planned behavior, which are attitude, subjective norm, and perceived behavioral control towards tax evasion through survey method. The unit of analysis is individual that works as civil servant in Malaysia. The sample size of this study is 384 respondents among civil servants in UTHM Batu Pahat Johor and the Office of Secretary of the State, Seremban Negeri Sembilan. The sampling technique used is multi-stage sampling technique, which firstly, the study used a stratified sampling method, then cluster sampling method, next, simple random sampling method, and lastly, the convenience sampling method that has been used in this study. Likert scale is used for the data measurement, while for the data collection consists of demographic, tax evasion, attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. The data analysis for the study are descriptive statistics and Pearson correlation.
Okay, research findings. So this section will explain about the demographic profiles of the respondent that had been analysed. Okay, so the majority of the respondent is female, which equates to 71.8% with frequency of 56 respondents. Next, the respondents aged 51 to 60 years old make up the highest percentage with the total of 52.6% with the frequency of 41 respondents. Next, it could be suggested that Malay respondents dominate the survey participation compared to other race, where more than half of the respondents are Malay with the percentage of 62.8%. Next, it could be concluded that merit civil servants dominate the survey since it recorded 79.5% or the frequency of 62 participations in the study. Next, the study recorded the majority of respondents have education at degree level with 52.6% as illustrated in the table. As for the total monthly income, the majority of respondents receive monthly income at RM2,000 to RM3,000 as well as RM5,001 to RM7,000 at 28.2%, which equates to 22 respondents in each category. Next, for the experience in paying taxes, it could be noted that most of the participants of the study had experience paying taxes more than 10 times, which it equates to 56.4% with the frequency of 44 respondents. Next is hypothesis testing. Okay, so since this study aims to identify the correlation between the three independent variables, which are attitude, subjective norms, and also perceived behavioral control with tax evasion behavior, so Pearson correlation analysis is used in all three testing. Okay, so moving on to the first objective, which is to identify the significant influence of attitude towards tax evasion among civil servants in Malaysia. So the study found that the R value is 0.617 while the P value is 0.144. Since the P value is more than 0.05, it shows no significant influence of attitudes towards tax evasion among civil servants in Malaysia. Thus reject H1. Okay, the second objective is to identify the significant influence of subjective norms towards the tax evasion behavior among civil servants in Malaysia. So the study found that the R value is 0.143 while the P value is 0.212. Okay, so since the P value is more than 0.05, it shows no significant influence of subjective norms towards tax evasion among civil servants in Malaysia. Thus, reject H2. Okay, so the third objective is to identify the significant influence of perceived behavioral control towards tax evasion among civil servants in Malaysia. So the study found that the R value is 0.495 while the P value is 0.000. So since the P value is less than 0.05, it shows significant influence of perceived behavioral control towards tax evasion among civil servants, thus accept H3.
The research implications are to help the government to find out the main factors of tax evasion to come up with relevant policies in combating tax evasion among public servants. This study could provide some further understanding as to whether the attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control significantly influence the civil servants in Malaysia in complying with the tax laws. Next, it is to ensure that people don't take this issue lightly and are able to increase tax compliance. The increase in the tax compliance will be able to assist the government to deliver all the goods and services effectively and efficiently with high transparency. Therefore, the awareness of tax compliance among taxpayers will improve significantly. However, there are some limitations to this study, such as limited demographic profile, which the findings have response bias in terms of representativeness of race. More than half of the respondents are Malays, which is 62.8%, followed by others, 25.6%, Indians, 7.7%, and Chinese, only 3.8%. In addition, low response rate can be argued as one of the significant limitations of the study, since the response rate of this research is 20.3%. The low response rate could possibly be due to the time constraint of the research, where the questionnaires were distributed in the time span of only 2 months from February until April 2022.
Okay, future research suggestion. Okay, so the first suggestion is the potential of the model used in this study. So the study used 3 independent variables from the theory of planned behavior by Adjazen, which are attitude, subjective norms, and also perceived behavioral control. So this model have explanatory power, which suggests that it has potential to explain the tax evasion behavior among civil servants. So, to test the stability of this model in explaining tax evasion behavior among civil servants, it is suggested to test it to bigger samples. Okay, secondly, it is suggested for future researchers to adopt mixed method approach. So it can ensure better understanding about tax evasion behavior among civil servants. So for example, researchers can use interview technique by providing real case tax scenario so that the respondents may relate to it before answering the questions. Okay, so mixed method approach actually has been used in many tax studies, such as from the study Sohila Abdul Hamid in 2014 and also the study from Natras Saad in 2011. Okay, so in conclusion, this research has focuses on the tax evasion behavior among civil servants by examining the correlation between independent variables, which are attitude, subjective norms, and also perceived behavioral control, and also dependent variable, which is tax evasion behavior. So the study was conducted in UTHM Batupal and also the Office of State Secretary of Negeri Sembilan. So by using Pearson correlation test, the study found that the perceived behavioral control have significant relationship with tax evasion behavior, while attitude and also subjective norm have negative relationship with tax evasion behavior, which shows that they did not influence the tax evasion behavior. So that's all from us. Thank you.